thoughtful ideas and suggestions for guests and topics.
Great events, programs, and recent documentaries.
All the countries are listening.
Welcome to this week's segment of Dialogue Houston. I'm your host, Lawrence Payne. To our regular viewing audience, welcome. To those joining us perhaps for the first time here for ACC's TV Dialogue Houston, we can be found now every Tuesday and Thursday at 6 a.m. and again at 6 p.m., Saturday afternoons at 3 p.m. And always at the top of the hour, let me thank you for your very thoughtful calls, emails, and text messages concerning previous shows we've aired here on ACC TV, but particularly your great ideas for topics and guests and subjects to be covered on upcoming segments of Dialogue Houston. For after all, this is your community affairs, public affairs show here on ACC TV, now proudly in its 26th season. We have a great year planned for you as we look at some of the issues impacting us as Houstonians here in Houston. There's also, as we mentioned before, the 50th anniversary of HCC. We'll be highlighting some of those events as we go forward. And today's show in particularly, I'm very happy and proud to have a very special guest, one who I have known since I've come to Houston. He is a friend. We've worked together on many different issues over the years, particularly through the NAACP. And he is I can use the word, I don't use it lightly, he is an icon here in this city because of the work that he's done. It is our distinguished law professor from TSU, from Texas Southern University, Dr. James Douglas. But let me just read a little bit because I can't get it all in. I don't have time. We'd be here till tomorrow. So let me just run down a short little list. Dr. Douglas has been the Vice President for Government Affairs and Community Relations at TSU, the Executive Vice President, the President and Professor of Law for the Thurgood Marshall School of Law, the Interim President and Professor of Law at the Thurgood Marshall School of Law, Interim Provost and Senior Vice President of Academic Affairs at TSU, the Dean and the Professor of the Thurgood Marshall School of Law, the Assistant Professor of the Thurgood Marshall School of Law, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But he was the Dean of the Thurgood Marshall School of Law, his alma mater, from July 81 to July 95. And right after that, he became our president, the president of TSU in 1995. He is also the local president of the NAACP branch here in Houston, and he's also the general counsel for NAACP, longer than we can ever imagine or talk about on this show. And he has done so much. Here's what I've always loved and admired about Dean Douglas, and I'm saying this with him sitting right there. Not only the things you know and see that he does in front of the camera, or that he does publicly, but this is one of those individuals in our community that gets so much done behind the scenes because of the ability of picking up the phone, because there's these relationships of mutual trust and respect that we talk a lot about on this show. He has those ingrained relationships of mutual trust and respect that he can pick up the phone and make things happen, and do it sometimes very quietly behind the scenes. We know he did it, but nobody else kind of knows he did it. And so that's important, though. Dean Douglas, welcome. It's just a pleasure to have you here.
It's my pleasure to be here.
Because as we've talked over the years, that's what it's about, right? It starts with those relationships across all barriers. And as you develop those relationships of mutual trust and respect, you can get things done.
You know, it's funny you mentioned relationships, because a few years ago, I can't remember who the parties involved was, but we needed to get something done. And, I had students in my office. I picked up the phone. I called a few people, all of that, and they said to me, how do you get to meet people like that?
Right.
And I said, you understand, I've known these people forever.
Yes. Yeah.
None of us were anything.
Exactly.
We formed these relationships.
Right.
See, millenniums, they think you can just all at once.
Yep.
You know, you can go up and you meet the
on that
president
little
of the
machine,
United States and
right.
my friend.
Right.
I said, these are long-term relationships.
Yeah, and important to point that out too, because those quality relationships over time that we've developed, we spend time, it's a face-to-face, eyeball to eyeball. We break bread together, right? We have breakfast with, look, the Facebook thing and tweeting and texting, that's not the kind of friend I'm talking about.
Right.
I'm talking about somebody who you sit across the table with, eyeball to eyeball. You can see the inflection and tonality in their voice change. You can see the expression on their face change, and you can get deeply into issues in your discussion.
You're right.
So as we go forward in Houston, let's fast forward a little bit. Houston, as Dr. Kleinberg, our friend at Rice, always said, the most diverse city in America, yeah. The most segregated community in America also, the most gated community in America also. And I've heard you say this when you've talked about the history of the NAACP and the history of Houston. You always want us to have that long vision. Not only to talk about our past heroes and sheroes who've gone before us, the walking, talking now generation, but always your eye on those yet waiting to be born. And what kind of world are we leaving for them, right? Because you've said that.
Right, but one of the things I think people forget, and you know, when I was dean, we were always getting awards for the American Bar Association of being the most diverse law school in the country. But I tried to get them to understand that diversity has to be managed. It
Yes,
doesn't just happen. And when you bring all the different cultures together, you can't just throw them
Right.
in
Yep.
an environment and just expect it to work
Yep.
without creating that respect that each culture has for the other.
And part of managing that is when we do get them all together, to realize that we're trying to develop the sense of everybody being equal as human beings.
Right.
Just, that's the only factor. They're all human beings, so therefore all human being lives matter. All human beings are equal. But to manage that, as you said, what happens, okay, we got to the great diversity around the table. Finally, everybody has a seat at the table. The question always, and I've heard you say this too, are all voices sitting around the table equal?
Right.
And are they equally respected? Because that's where it falls down.
In order to generate that respect, you have to understand the culture of each one of the diverse groups.
Right. So in Houston, like I said, this is the 5th anniversary of HCC. You were around when we birthed in Houston Community College from HISD. Where do you think we are now in this whole question of education? We keep playing with education, public education. We keep going around the fringes and fine tuning and tweaking, but we never seem to get to the core of what's the problems and the issues.
I think what we've forgotten is that learning can be fun, but learning is work. And we've tried to get there without the work.
And teaching to the test is not it.
I always tell people, for some reason, we understand that to build a muscle, you have to work it.
You gotta use it.
The same thing is true with the mind.
You gotta use it.
You can't build a mind
Right.
without working it. And so we tried to make it easy rather than to just say, look, and I always tell my students, you know, I tell them I'm like the Marines.
Right.
All right? When people go to the Marines, they believe they're going to be better than all the other military people
Right.
because of the hard work they
That's
put
right.
in.
That's right.
And so I think if we say to people, you're going to work hard, but at the end of the day, your mind is going to be better and stronger and
Sharp.
sharper than all the other
Yep.
minds that you're going to come in contact
And be able to
with.
do creative thinking.
Right.
I mean, it's teaching to the test and teaching to the lowest standard bar. That's not good. We need people who can be creative and innovative and have their own thoughts and creative
Right.
thinking and challenge people like you and me.
You know, it's the old phrase, memorizing is not thinking.
That's true.
So we have so many people, because they come to the law school the same way. They believe the way to learn is to memorize,
Right.
and I have to
Right.
let them know that if they're going to really be excellent lawyers, they're going to have to change
really think.
the way they learn.
And do you find that you get students even at the advanced stage of coming to law school who still their writing skills and even sometimes their reading skills is still not where it should be?
Well, they have horrible reading skills, but I tell people, if you have poor thinking skills, you're going to have poor writing skills.
Right.
So I try to spend more time on the thinking, because I tell people writing is the end result of a thought.
That's true.
And if you can't have a thought,
You never be able to put it on paper, right? That's true. Well, one of the most valuable things I learned from lawyers over the years was the ability, that little thing which I've used called issue spotting.
right.
To be able to go straight to the heart of whatever that document is and pick out the key components and the key important parts of it. And that, I think, can apply to any profession, even in life, in your life. to get down to the core of what's the real issue, what's the real important. All this other stuff is just around this.
But I tell my students it's called focused reading.
Yep.
You don't just read to read. When you start to read a piece, you're looking for something.
Right, right. So the challenge today, and we're going to take a break in a minute, but we'll pick this up when we come back, but I want to put it out there for now. In this second era of the resegregation of public education, you and I went to the first era. We went through school, got a great education in our little one-race school. But in the second era of the resegregation of public education here in Houston, as we know it, particularly in HISD, there's something that we didn't have that's missing in this era that we had in the first era. And HISD is still, I think, wrestling with, there are 207,000, 209,000 kids in HISD this year. Only 8.9% are Anglos. 8.9 out of 207,000 kids. So I tell the district, first of all, the kids that you have left, don't call them minorities because they're not the minority.
Right.
They're the majority, but I got to put a word in front of the majority. Don't get excited about you being numerically and demographically the majority. You're the new unempowered majority. Because still the lousy education that so many of them getting is not helping them at all.
You know, one of the benefits I had in Houston, I explained to people, is really a forever changing city.
Right.
Even though I went to an all-black school, at about 9 years old, my parents moved into a white neighborhood. So I kind of had both the best
Benefit.
worlds.
Yep.
And so when I talk to my friends, especially when I was young in my career before I came to TSU and I was working in all-white environments, and they found it kind of difficult adjusting because they come out of all black. And I didn't have that difficulty because of my childhood.
We're going to pick that thought up. We're going to take a small pause and break. We'll come back with Dean Douglas and dive a little deeper into some of the issues facing us here as Houstonians, particularly from his perspective as the president of our local branch of the NAACP. Stay tuned and we'll be right back.
Meet Travion. His mom went to Houston Community College, so choosing that was easy. Choosing what to study from more than 100 instructional fields? Not so much. HCC, for everyone, anytime.
When I was growing up, my mom was extremely tidy. We were trained to put things back where we got them from. One day, when I walked into my mom's house, I felt like I walked to someone else's house. There was stuff everywhere. And just growing up the way I grew up and to see this transition was very alarming.
When Sean talked to me, it was a wake-up call, and that's when I went to the doctor.
HCC's online college is officially open. This not only means online classes, but also online degrees and certificates. You can now credential up anytime, anywhere. Join the fast-growing number of students getting their full college education from anywhere they use a laptop. HCC currently offers 32 fully online degrees and will offer 71 next year. You no longer have to find a way or time to get to college. HCC brings college to you.
Meet Saskia. She loves cars. Seriously, she whistles at them. So she's studying engineering at Houston Community College. After that, a 4-year degree. Then it's off to the races. HCC, for everyone, anytime.
Welcome back to this week's segment of Dialogue Houston. If you've been with us for the first part of the show, you know my wonderful guest is Dean Douglas, James Douglas from the Texas Southern University, Thurgood School of Law, and the NAACP president for the last 5.5, 6 years, but the legal counsel for the NAACP longer than we can talk about. But I want to turn our attention in the second part of the show here to the NAACP. This is an election year.
It is an election year.
This is where all the question becomes about voting suppression and all those things we've been talking and hearing about the last couple of years. This is also the year we count the census. So everybody has to get counted. Everybody's got to register to vote. Everybody's got to go out and vote. Easier said than done, right?
And it also means we're moving to redistricting.
And of course, the big piece, the redistricting after we do the count.
Right.
So we need an accurate count for more reasons than one.
Right.
But it does seem there's activity and there's momentum, but not a lot of it.
You know, we're getting to a period of time where people like us, and I'm talking about people who really lived through segregation, we're slowly leaving this earth.
Yeah.
And so the people who follow us often don't even understand what we're fighting for,
That's truly.
because they don't see racism the way we saw it. It is not up front and in your face, and often they don't
Right.
recognize it. And
You're
so,
right. You're right. The institutional part of racism that is probably impacting more things today is not
Right.
that upfront in your face.
Right.
Nobody's going to be calling you the N-word. You're not going to be directly discriminated or prejudiced against. But it is still so ingrained though in the fabric and fiber of who we are as a country. It hadn't gone away.
it has definitely not gone away.
And I don't think in some cases it's gotten better. I think in some cases it's gotten worse. I told somebody the other day, I feel like I'm reliving 1968 all over again right now.
Well, I mean, as a segment of society, I'm not talking about individuals.
Right, right.
We were in a much better economic position
Yes.
during segregation
Yes.
than we are now. I mean, when I think of Dowling Street and Lyons Avenue and Jensen Drive and all the businesses and the going concern, and how Fifth Ward and Third Ward and Fourth Ward was
We're
booming,
thriving, yeah.
you know, commercially.
Yeah. Yeah.
All of that's been lost.
And why do you think it's been lost? What are the contributing factors? Because you hear, depending on who you talk to, you hear different versions of reality. And I said, no, I think a lot of that is made up. There are factors that were out of the control of the people in those communities and neighborhoods that
Well,
led to that.
I think we bought into
Yeah, we
the
did.
melting pot theory. And I always tell people, America will never be a melting pot. Now, we can be successful
Right.
if we understand that our success is not in being a melting pot, but being a good stew. Because in a melting pot, each element loses its own identity. That's never going to happen in America.
Right.
But in a stew, each element retains
Adds.
its own identity, but it's just a combination
Add flavor.
of the right.
So the question is, I love your analogy of melting pot to the stew. So the question becomes, if that's true, the second era of segregation is, I think, poverty first, then race. The first era of segregation was race, then poverty.
Right.
But because the poverty is so pervasive, if we don't address the social economic parts of the issues that are impacting public urban education, we'll never get to the pedagogy education side because that's political. That's change, that's systemic change, that's eradication. We don't talk about the change, the laws that we need to change or need to be amended. We don't talk about that.
Right.
And unless you get the systemic change part, as you well know, it ain't gonna happen. We talk about what needs to be done. We don't do the hard stuff.
Because one of the things that's happened when you talk about the poor, the bottom, the people at the top has managed to pit
Against each
poor against each other based on difference in skin color. And somehow we have to get them to understand that they're all in the same pot together. And the only way they're going to get out of it is through unity and not fighting each other.
So for the sake of our shared humanity going forward, how do we have a conversation that is not an either or, but a both and? Yes, there's issues, I grant you there are issues of personal responsibility, that's one side, but there are also issues of accountability. If people want to get to equity and talk about equity, I don't think you can talk about equity until you talk about both personal responsibility and and accountability.
But see, if you can't get, I'll tell you what, when I first became a dean, administration, I didn't go into higher ed to be an administrator.
Right.
All
And
right.
you said that to me once. Yes,
Okay.
yeah.
When I first became a dean, and I noticed things are not happening in the university the way I think they ought to
Right.
happen. And I actually was attending a national meeting of law school deans, and at one of the seminars we had a speaker, and he'd written a book called The Academic Administrator's Grid, to talk about academic administration. But the piece that helped me and take away, he said, look, if you want to institute major change in a university, you have to have buy-in from the president.
Yes.
So it has to start at the top.
Yep.
If it doesn't start at the top, it's not going to happen. So I think at some point, until we elect someone in the White House who says, a part of my platform is to bring this country together. And so until that happens, it's going to be very, very difficult, because people say what they want. The president is the moral compass of this country.
The moral compass of this country, yes.
Right. People
I know.
don't want to believe
I
that,
know,
but
I
it
know.
is.
It is. It sets the tone.
Right.
It sets the tone.
And so I think at some point, until we can get some person in the White House who says, look, I really think every person, regardless of color, ethnicity, or economic status, plays a role in the future development of this country, and we need to bring everyone together. Until we can get that to happen, it's not going to happen.
Don't you think in part it's also an ethical question? The ethical question is this: what is the fair and ethical treatment of all human beings? Just a
Right.
baseline discussion of what
Right.
that looks like, acts like,
Right.
feels like. If I can have that discussion and get some agreement on what that baseline looks like, I can then talk about all human being lives matter, all human beings are equal. But if I can't have that first discussion and get some agreement on that, we ain't gonna get to the other two.
See, a part of the problem, and people don't like to hear me say this, is capitalism is built on being unethical. And so it's really hard to, one of my favorite presidents was Jimmy Carter, and I really suffered with him because he had such a good heart.
Yes, he did.
And he, it was, I always say sometimes, he
big
was
of a
too
heart.
righteous
Yeah.
to be in the
Right.
office, because
Yeah.
it's hard to step outside
Yeah.
of politics.
Yeah.
And so, I don't know, I think at some point it's going to be hard. And I see us, that's why the wealth keeps, most of the wealth and the majority of wealth keep going to the top 1%. If we don't change that, I think ultimately I see a revolution in the United States.
Yeah.
I mean, people don't want to think like that. But at some point, the poor is going to get sick and tired of being poor, and we're going to have a violent revolution.
Well, it's a social justice issue, that word nobody likes to talk about. It is truly a social justice issue,
Right.
because then when you said that, it made me think, does democracy have a chance going forward? Because the way I was taught democracy, there are 5 tenets of what it means to be a citizen living in a democracy. We love to have a conversation about 2 of those 5, which are what are my individual rights and privileges that go with being a citizen.
Right.
Because who's that about? That's about me, right? It's all about me. What about the other 3 of the 5 tenets of what it means to be a citizen living in a democracy? What are our common duties, obligations, and responsibilities? To whom? The other. Define the other in our society. Someone increasingly different than me, don't look like me. That's the we and us. We, the United States of America, has never been able to get to we and us. We're not a we and us nation. We're still an I and me, given what you just said about capitalism, greed, institutional racism, the top 1%. All those things function on this side of the equation for I and me benefit, not for we and us.
But you see, we would never develop to be the kind of country we want to be.
So it was a farce to start with.
Well, if you look at the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, if you look at what they say and you look at what they were,
True. True.
Totally different.
Going back to slavery and everything else.
It was
Yep.
created to protect the interests of wealthy white men from the King of England.
So, since I have my number one lawyer here with me are we truly eroding the constitutional law?
Yes.
What's happening now, when we attack different things, okay, I saw that, I read that, I understand it. But when I see the Constitution and the laws that are being eroded or being misused or misinterpreted, it's going to take us years to get back to figuring out what that was supposed to be to start with, let alone improving it.
And look, one of the things I can say, one of the smartest moves that I think Donald Trump made during his campaign was to say, I'm going to make this Supreme Court as conservative as all of you who support me are, and I'm going to not only say that to you, I'm going to tell you, these are the people I'm going to put on the court. So if you put me here, I am going to protect your interests for years to come.
For many years going forward, right.
Because I'm going to put the kind of people on. Right.
Life appointments. So we're going to have a pendulum swing back at some point, and I believe in history, and I believe in the pendulum will always swing back eventually. It goes so far and it comes back. But when it does come back, we got so much to rebuild.
But see, this is what, see, the Supreme Court is kind of a reflection of societal views.
Right.
That's why the same institution that decided Dred Scott, decided Plessy, decided Brown, decided Hopwood.
Right.
That's why those decisions, because the decisions swing as the culture and the thought process of the country swings.
They tell me we're gonna have to swing out of here, you and I.
Okay.
Thank you, Doug. Thank you, man. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Dean James Douglas, we could probably sit here for another couple hours and go at this. I want to thank you all for being part of Dialogue Houston for this week. We look forward to you joining us in the coming weeks. This has been one of those rare opportunities to talk about the history of the pieces of Houston as we know as Houstonians for our collective future together. We're going to talk more about that because the 200th anniversary of the city of Houston's coming up in a short 16 years, our bicentennial. What do we want to be like, talk like, act like by then? We need to think about that, have a long-term vision. We're good at short-term visions, we're not good at long-term visions. So we're going to be exploring some of those things about what needs to happen to get to that wonderful date and time. So we look forward to you being part of it. We have to go for now, but until next week, as always, peace, power, and love.